So that's our conclusions. We're going to now open it up for discussion and input. We have until noon, so we have almost 50 minutes for your input. Penny Langhammer is going to man a computer, human a computer, and take down your comments, and we will, to the extent humanly possible, we will build in your comments and considerations on this, but we have to present it in plenary at 2 o'clock, okay? So, first of all, just to start, can I have a show of hands to think that, are we mainly on track? Just the mainly on track question with these recommendations. Good. That's not a bad start. So, we want comments on the individual ones, but we're not going to be productive in our time if we get too wordsmithy about it. So let's try not to get too wordsmithy. I would like to know, first off, what are the gaps? What did we absolutely miss here in terms of findings or recommendations? So Diego, hand up over there.
Just while we're waiting for the microphone, what we're distributing now is a few copies, only 5, of the full text of the input that we're putting in as it is currently drafted, and a copy of the 18 recommendations. The 19th one was written after we copied this. You'll have to share, so the full document, please pass around. The one-pager with the recommendations, please share that with people around you. We only have about 100 copies, and I think there's about 300 people in the room, so it's going to have to be shared amongst 3 people to look at. But what we wanted to be able to do was to show you what comments are being collected as we go forward.
So we've switched back to now Penny's computer, so you can see what Penny is capturing for you. If we need to switch back to a recommendation on this computer, we can do that, just say, because Robert, I think, can flip back and forth rather quickly. So, sorry, go ahead with your question.
My name is Glynis Jones from the Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. It seems to me that this discussion is not complete without a recognition that all the factors that are threatening and degrading conservation areas and limiting protected areas management relate to the adverse impacts of growing population levels and changing resource uses. And I would like to suggest that consideration be given to a recommendation that encourages and facilitates governments of nations to identify optimal futures for ecological, social and economic, optimal futures in relation to ecological, social and economic well-being, and that these include measures for conservation outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a tricky one to deal with because we didn't talk about it, at least from my understanding, we didn't talk about it as a collective together. The question of population, and I know it's important. I would love to hear other comments on whether we should build that in. So, Sarah, right there. Okay. Annabelle, if you could work that.
I thought the data was up.
Given the scientific evidence that we saw at the... Hello? Can you hear me?
Just closer to your mouth.
Yeah, given scientific evidence that we saw at many presentations at our stream, I'd like to see some language saying that we need strictly protected areas to be at the core of our protected area systems if we really want to protect biodiversity.
All right, I'm going to flip just back and forth. I'm going to flip back and forth sides of the room just so we're fair. There's lots of hands up and I can't keep track of you all. I will try. So this gentleman first and then Piero next.
Hello, Mark Mulligan, King's College London. I think wherever we mention biodiversity in this document, we also need to mention ecosystem services for the political traction that they have, but also because of their importance alongside biodiversity.
All right, thank you, Mark. Piero?
First of all, excellent work. It's really a very good synthesis. My impression at Piero Genovese Invasive Species Specialist Group of IUCN, there were several sessions on invasive species, and this is reflected in what you said on the beginning, but not fully in the document. I think there should be a call for better management by protected areas. So the call for dealing with major threats is to governments, local and global communities, not to protected areas. I think we should also call protected areas to improve the management efficacy on the major threats that they face.
I think we have that, or at least in my brain we have that, but if you can give us specific wording on that,
right,
where we're missing it, that would be helpful. On this side of the room, yes, lady right there.
Hi, my name is Harlene Patricia. I'm on the Freshwater Conservation Subcommittee of IUCN and with the Australian Rivers Institute at Griffith University. I just want to acknowledge that while we've done great work with marine and terrestrial systems, there's a long way to go with freshwater systems, and we need specific targets for our freshwater systems, and we need equal attention to freshwater systems in the IUCN, the WCPA, and in the Aichi targets. Thank you.
If you could give us some wording on that, that's a general statement, but we need to move beyond general. So if you could write some wording on that, that will be helpful. I think there's agreement on that. Yes, Roger.
Roger Crofts, I think this is really good because it emphasises the importance of effective management. 2 points I'd like you to consider putting in. One is we need to police the real implementation of all of these politicians who are offering to meet the HE target. Do we believe that they're anything other than paper parks? Because they're meaningless if they are. Second, what I don't notice in there is this integrated and holistic approach. It's still focusing on biodiversity. I support a speaker who said ecosystem services. Due to your help, we've fed in geodiversity as well, which is integral, the abiotic and the biotic. And we also need to remember the cultural knowledge. So if we could have a much more integrated statement about what we mean by effectiveness, that would be good. Thanks, Stephen.
All right, just by way of background, and maybe Tom, you can weigh in here. Each stream and theme is producing a report. My hope is that they don't stand alone in the final promise of Sydney, that they do get integrated, but I'm not sure if there was a final decision on that. Can you enlighten us, Tom, on that?
Yeah, just to be clear that streams 2, 3, 4 and 8 address different aspects of the delivery of ecosystem services from protected areas to humanity. I think the job for this stream is to make sure that we provide clear connection points to the work of those other streams, rather than trying to duplicate the very large volume of material that will be emerging from those 4 streams.
Penny, just behind you, or Annabelle, just behind you, sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a comment on point 9. There you recommend the support of connectivity projects. I think projects is too less. We need a complete system that adds to the more general approach. So the country should force to make clear gap analysis and then make an action plan for connectivity. In German, for example, that is already fixed by the German nature conservation law.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I agree completely. So it's not just projects. On this side front.
Martin Taylor, WWF. Just on recommendation 19, Stephen. I think it would be valuable to connect to IEG 12, the prevention of the extinction of threatened species, known threatened species. That whatever target that really should have been done with 11, but post IEG 11, it should be strongly connected to that target and actually informed by that target. What do we need in terms of protected areas, or the appropriate balance of protected areas and sustainable land uses, to achieve IEG 12, the prevention of the extinction of threatened species?
All right, thank you. So we're going back and forth at the front, please. And why don't you move to the back after this, so we'll get people at the back as well.
Susan Tosh, CM and CEC.
Hi, Susan.
I think one connecting line might be that the health of our environment is directly related to the health of our communities. And this is particularly evidenced currently in the issues around too much or too little water, our hydrologic systems, and our drinking water supplies, climate change, and the emerging illnesses, that the environmental community should be on par with many of the mitigating issues and avenues that are being taken to address these in every avenue.
Okay, on this side, I'd like to go to the back if I could, Harvey.
Thanks. I know that the marine no-take target is 30%. I think that's great. I sure would like us to be a bit more specific in relation to terrestrial ideas. I sensed from our session that nobody wanted to say 50% is a magic number, and that's just fine with me. But if we could say something like we should protect in the range of half on the terrestrial side, it would leave the room for there to be the space around that rather than a precise figure. And when we had a brief show of hands, most people were in that 40 to 60 range, which is just fine with me. But if we could say in the range of half is what we need on the land, I think it would be much more helpful than saying, gosh, we don't have a comment numerically, but we do on the marine side.
Yeah, we tried to craft it as, that's not the target for conservation on the marine side, it's the target for no-take. And as you know, on the marine side, it gets a little messy like that, but okay, we should hear other things on this as well. Got to go to this side at the back somewhere. Right closest to you there, Annabelle.
Hi, Alison Wagner, NASA Earth Science Division. I appreciate the call for management effectiveness in recommendations 4 and 5, and the call for sharing data and the need and the importance of making this data discoverable, available, and accessible in recommendation number 18. I think it would be helpful to link that recommendation 18 to recommendations 4 and 5 and some of the others by saying that making the data for collection, evaluation, and reporting of data available and accessible to all will help with management effectiveness, and that's a critical aspect of it. And I think it would strengthen both calls for that.
Can you give us some text on that, please?
Sure.
Thank you. At the front here, orange.
My understanding from sitting through the sessions is that we should be able to say something much stronger about the 50%. It isn't something that's just supported by community. There's plenty of scientific evidence to show that the current protected area state is too small. We're losing species. I sat at presentations that said there were a lot of economic benefits of having at least 30%, and I'd certainly like to see that statement strengthened beyond just the public supports 50%.
Okay, thank you. Can you, I'll just get the closest person from you. Let's get as many as possible, and then if you could come over here. This poor gentleman's had his hand up for a while.
Phil Ingerbells from the Victoria National Parks Association. I know climate change is a separate stream, and there will be hopefully some strong recommendations coming there. But it would seem if you're advocating for increasing targets, it would be good to have a statement from this stream that that's in the context of increasing and ongoing growing impact from climate change. To reinforce that on this stream as well as having come from there is just so important.
We have listed it, and we know it will boom out from our colleagues just next door here. But if you've got any specific wording on that, that would be helpful.
Rebecca Spindler from the Taronga Conservation Society. I'd like to support the fact that we should have a recommendation around population growth, and maybe it could be tied into some of the things that I've heard about the government persistent belief that economic growth is at the expense of the environment. We have to have them understand that they are not mutually exclusive, they are co-dependent, and that we should tie that into some of our targets and making sure that we have governments stop having incentives to reproduce and provide birth control to their population.
Just pick somebody, Annabelle.
Thank you. Steve Larson from the Shooters and Fishers Party in Parliament House. I think these 19 recommendations miss the CBD's goals number 2 and number 3, that is sustainable utilisation and the equitable access to resources.
So we're at the point where we need recommendations more than statements to put in here. If you could help me with where this was discussed and the evidence for it, and you know, we're focused on target 11, that would be helpful. Okay? All right, on this side, Alison.
I have it here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Enrico De Menin, Research Fellow, University of Helsinki.
So up to your mouth a little, please.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I was actually wondering, as we are going to have to enhance connectivity between protected areas in the future, and as it looks like the target of protecting 17% is not going to be enough, and we're going to have to maintain a lot of species and communities outside of protected areas. How do we actually provide more incentives, you know, like financial incentives or alternative incentives to local communities or private landowners to actually be sure that we're not going to be losing those important patches for biodiversity in the future?
Okay, again, I'll just implore you that we're trying to wrap up what we've heard and build on recommendations. So that's if you can provide your comments in those terms, it'll be more helpful to the process. All right, thanks.
Michelle Grady from Pew. I think the recommendations are good. With 19, I have a recommendation for a small but important change. It's clear from the sessions, the Beyond 80 sessions, that it was said that that these targets, in being aspirational, should not be absolute, nor should they be the end point. And so I would recommend that the wording before 30% say at least 30%.
All right.
Hi there, Prue Addison from the University of Melbourne. It seems in a lot of these recommendations that there is a role for conservation science. It's implied, but I think it would be great to see an actual recommendation that states how important conservation science in terms of research and monitoring is in actually achieving a lot of these conservation goals.
All right, we call that in here evidence-based decision making in order to be more inclusive, to include traditional knowledge, and so that just lets you know that's where we came from, and it is in there as evidence-based decision making. If that's not good enough for you, give us some suggestions. Alison Harworth.
Hi, I'd also like to just reiterate the comments from Harvey and from the front of the room on the importance of being more specific and ambitious on number 19, and also that we should be specifically mentioning protected areas, not in that recommendation. Right now, as I read it, it said conservation measures, but the protected areas should be embedded specifically and mentioned specifically.
Yeah, we call them, it's called conservation systems in the, to build in the connectivity lands in this. So if, again, any text would be helpful. You can just scratch it down. We'll have 2 hours to try and deal with it. All right, on this, who you got next, Annabelle? Okay.
Stu Butchart, BirdLife International. I'm drawing on the comment earlier on made about the importance of the contribution that excuse me, protected areas can make to Target 12. I'd like to suggest strengthening the wording of Recommendation 8, where we ask countries to consider sites that contribute significantly to the global persistence of biodiversity. Governments have done a woefully bad job at protecting these sites. Could we strengthen that wording, perhaps consider targeting or even consider prioritising, something like that?
Right, just a process check. Penny, are you able to get these at this rate? Penny and Mark? All right, can you repeat the last part of that recommendation, Stu?
So change the word consider and strengthen it, perhaps adding another word, consider targeting or consider prioritising, or some other word like that just strengthens the recommendation that we're asking government to do more than just consider these things. We want to see action.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen, there is a question from here. If there is an email where people can send their text in the next few minutes.
Yes. Mark, do you want to give out your email? Okay, well...
Just write it on paper and hand it up to the folks passing around the...
Well, no, emails are fine. How about Penny? Give out your email then.
My address is just m.hockings, H-O-C-K-I-N-G-S, @uq.edu.au. So you can send them through and I can get them here.
Okay, so we're going to this side of the room. Can you come forward as the gentleman at the front here, please?
Craig Bohm, WWF Pacific, just to support what Michelle Grady from Pew said on the at least 30%. If we go back to Hugh Possingham, he said that at least 30% in marine areas is supported ecologically, but also on a economic basis, and then we start talking upwards from there. The other critical thing Professor Possingham said was that we need to keep protecting more until the declines stop. Now, it's a very nice simple message that we have these minimum targets, but we have to just keep protecting more until the declines stop, which is something I think everybody can digest. And I would recommend that be included in a form under recommendation 19.
Yeah, we're on the horns of a dilemma, as was evidenced in the last one, between a target we can campaign on and a target which we can really justify scientifically. I think Hugh's summing it up to conserve more until biodiversity loss stops is scientifically absolutely defensible, and all, the community would be on side with that, but it's hard to sell in the halls of parliaments around the world.
That's why it's an addendum to the percentages, not an instead of.
Okay. Go to her next, and we'll go over on this side.
Here first? Okay, Brian Everingham, National Parks Association of New South Wales. Recommendation 2, where it says IUCN adopts formal definitions of protected area, downgrading, downsizing and degazettement, appears to be a little bit open-ended. I know what you're getting at, but I think that needs strengthening.
Thank you. We'll look forward to your suggested text. Yes.
On item number 8, it says countries, local communities and private sector consider sites that contribute significantly to the global biodiversity. I would add the word only. Countries, local communities and private sector consider only sites, because there's a lot of paper parks that count towards the IG target that probably shouldn't.
Right. I mean, right now the counting system is such that governments report through UNEP on what their protected areas of state are. So they report, we all know they report paper parks. We don't have a mechanism to vet. We only have a mechanism to incent, and that's the green list now. So I don't know a way around that. We can't say, well, we won't count them, because the mechanism, the global mechanism, is that governments have an agreement with UNEP under the CBD to report. So if you can think of a way to, I mean, I don't know any other way around that. And that becomes the WDPA. All right, the back, Megan.
Megan Barnes, the University of Queensland. I want to, and I think several of us want to, applaud Target 5, not just area. And I want to move in this whole conversation around percentage targets to integrating that point. There's several targets talking about percent this, percent that. If they're not effectively managed, then we're not getting anywhere.
Can you remind everybody what Target 5 is, Megan?
Yes, I can. Target 5 is talking about moving away from area as a measure and towards effective management as a measure. So progress towards IET Target 11 should be based on comprehensive assessment of how well protected areas are actually contributing to biodiversity conservation rather than just area covered.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to go to this side of the room. There's a chap right beside you now. Other way. There he is. No, lady. It's a lady beside you. There she is. Sarah, do you have somebody on this side?
Hello, Tuuli Toivonen from the University of Helsinki. And I was wondering, there's quite a strong emphasis on countries doing actions, but I was wondering if there could be a point that we could be emphasizing international collaboration as well, which is not very evident in here. For example, in the point 5, we could add something to support international collaboration between countries in order to reach better conservation in general globally, because there's strong scientific evidence that is what we should be doing.
Thank you. You know how to send that.
Glenys Giles, Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. In relation to the recommendation that refers to green list standards and outlook reporting, may I suggest that a complementary recommendation be that mechanisms be established to recognise, acknowledge and promote leading practice, exemplary practice, and to promote success stories. Thank you.
And in your recommendation, is that from the WCPA to do that? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think it's for the IEC and WCPA to do that. And all, actually, at all levels.
Okay. Who's on this side?
Hi there, Maritza with Greenpeace. I'm just wondering where online I can find point 19 because I want to email a submission around the percentages. Thanks.
The document is online at, if you go under the Stream 1, there's a library on the World Parks Congress website, and it's in the library. It'll probably be either the top or the bottom because it was the last one loaded.
Yes. Graham Cumming, University of Cape Town. This number 16 is really just a terminological kind of a thing. It's on a different philosophical level from most of the other targets, and it's far less important to my mind. I think we should just drop that one entirely from this list. It might be an important objective, but I don't think it's necessary that it goes to decision makers as a major recommendation coming out of the meeting.
Thank you. Anyone? No one in this side? This is good. So let's go at the back. Oh, you got somebody there? Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Carla. I'm with the University of Queensland. I just have a small recommendation. I'm not sure whether it fits better in 6 or 7, but I think we should explicitly mention that biodiversity monitoring should be encouraged in more protected areas. Because it says we should report on location, extent, management, effectiveness and governance. Maybe something to do with biodiversity would be helpful.
Okay, we have that in 18, I think.
Sorry.
And if you want to have a quick look at 18, and if there's anything you want to add to it, that might be the avenue. Thanks, Carla.
Thanks, Stephen.
Just got one more over here on this.
John Waithaka at the front here. Okay. Lincoln.
Thank you. Lincoln Fishbowl, BirdLife International. A couple of the comments during the course of this discussion have centred around the interpretation of the wording in the recommendations. It hasn't always been clear to some of the people in this room exactly what was implied. If these recommendations are going to governments, decision makers, I think we need to be transparent with our language. We may know what a biodiversity outcome is, but I'm not always sure that somebody whom we intend this document for will know what that means. So I just like to suggest that across this document, if we are using jargon, we need to be clear how we're using it and maybe change it or provide some interpretation of it elsewhere to say explicitly what that means in language that the layman would understand.
Excellent point, Lincoln. Just to be clear, we will not finish this document at the plenary tomorrow. The only thing that will get voted on at the plenary tomorrow is the vision statement. So these documents will have time to polish them and weed out incongruities and make them as clear as possible, while not changing the content. We want the content to come from this group. John.
Thanks. My name is John Waithaka from Parks Canada. The session that was dealing with human-wildlife conflicts felt that these conflicts are very important and they affect people, particularly in rural areas in the third world. And they felt that these conflicts are not given their due position when we meet in such forums. And they recommended that human-wildlife conflicts must be recognized as a significant threat that undermines the purpose, values, and benefits of protected areas, and weaken local and political support for these areas. So I think we still need to have a recommendation that it is important to address human-wildlife conflicts. There was a suggestion that we change the name from human-wildlife conflict because the name carries very negative connotation. Recognizing that what we need to promote is coexistence. We can never eliminate these conflicts. Thank you.
Asante sana, John. I think, though, the point's well taken that maybe this recommendation isn't weighty enough. So I think we can reconstruct it to build in your concerns. So if you could do that, if you could help us with that, that'd be good. We wanted to capture what came out of your session.
David Farrier from the University of Wollongong. I have a qualification to suggest in relation to recommendation 2, which is the PAD recommendation. PAD is actually in some cases carried out for positive conservation planning purposes. So I'd like to suggest a qualification at the end, I think, of the second sentence, which would read, where these are not carried out for conservation planning purposes.
Okay, thank you, David. On this side, I want to make sure I'm missing anybody over. Somebody right here.
Claire Hawkins, Tasmania. If we do talk about percentages, I guess it's really important to define that percentage, which we have for marine, but I'm not sure if that's clear for terrestrial. When we say 50%, what exactly do we mean at the level of protection?
All right, this is the only part that I'm kind of feeling awkward about, frankly. We need some kind of resolution on here which is going to be resonant. And maybe we can take the next, and I think I'm sensing we've run out of other burning issues, which is a good thing. Maybe we can take the next 10 minutes and chew on this and really get it out. It's hard. We don't want to be wrong, but we don't want to be weak either. So let's have a debate on this, and start right there at the back.
Sorry, I wanted to say something about recommendation 7. I can come back to that if you want. Or do you want me to go ahead with it? With regards to recommendation 7, if that is all right, risk assessment is a bit confusing in that context, and it would probably be better to say country support, etc., complete assessment for species and ecosystems, and then add and threats such as invasive species, and then insert that in there.
Thank you for sending in your text, and I've just been told there's some people waiting that have been missing. Sorry about that.
Randall Story from the Australian Department of Environment, just referring to recommendation 18. I think countries should adopt a greater consistency in the collection, but also make greater efforts in the collection of data.
Thank you. There were other people there too, Annabelle?
Claire Runt at the University of Queensland. In relation to point 9, I'd like to see the insertion of text. Governments establish cross-national or cross-jurisdictional initiatives and resource cross-jurisdictional initiatives. I think this is critically important for our migratory species.
Good point. At the front here, Annabelle.
Paola Mejia from WWF. I don't see here the discussion that was about how decisions are made during the process of planning, when we set goals, when we design protected areas, when we design networks that are just papers. So there was some issues related to how we are making decisions, like the social analysis, the stakeholder analysis, the processes. So I would like to see maybe something related to that. I don't know if it's when, for example, there is a point related to in number 12, the kind of guidelines that maybe IUCN should develop. And maybe it's important to strengthen the connection between the governance, social issues in planning processes.
Okay, again, we need text from you then if this is going to go. Jane, at the back of the room, is there anything you want to add to this discussion? You've been here listening. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in. This is Jane Smart, who's the Global Director for Conservation with IUCN, and is going to lead us through the next plenary session.
Well, thanks very much for the question, Stephen. No, I have nothing to add. It sounds a really excellent discussion, which is going to be very useful. Thank you.
All right. You've already had 2 questions, so I'm going to find people. Who else wants to get in here? The gentleman right here. Robert, we got a bad battery or something? So while that's getting fixed, let's go to the other mic. Where is the other mic? Go ahead.
I'm sorry I arrived a bit late, but I was just wondering whether ecological restoration is being explicitly considered in this.
Can you speak up just a bit?
I was just wondering whether ecological restoration is being explicitly recognised in this process.
We did have a very good session on it, and we did build in ecological restoration to one of the recommendations around connectivity. So the answer is yes, but if you think we're missing spots, you have an opportunity.
Jan Plesík, Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic based in Prague. When speaking about the numeric target of the landscape coverage and effectiveness, I would like only remind us that the Aichi target has in fact nothing to do with science. It was really pure political compromise, consensus and trade-off reached at the 4 in the morning, and we can have a really very ideal and ambitious target. But I remember that during the negotiation there was one of the biggest world economists at the time asking for the target which was below, at the time, global, in fact, coverage of protected areas. That means that there were one of the biggest economists asking for degazettation and downgrading and so on. So therefore, really, to be able to come with some realistic target, in my opinion, we need really mobilize general public and target groups through communication, education, and public awareness. Although knowing that this is probably more in details covered by other streams, I guess that we should include somewhere that we need really mobilizing the general public and target groups. If not, then of course we shall be dealing with blue sky science and probably conservation community greenhouse.
Thank you. Just trying to focus on people that haven't had an opportunity yet. So if you haven't had an opportunity to make a point.
Hi, Rose McGroom, WCS and ZSL from Southern Africa. It may be dealt with better in other streams perhaps, and I think it's a bit of an elephant in the room, but I think we can't have a whole recommendations about reaching conservation goals without more on efforts to combat population growth. Because trying to reach these extended targets of 50% of terrestrial land and 30% of marine areas, preventing biodiversity declines is going to be completely impossible in certain parts of the world unless population growth is tackled. And I think it would be a missed opportunity from this stream not to have a specific recommendation about efforts to reduce population growth, be it through working with ministries or women's rights or family planning or whatever, but it needs to be mentioned quite strongly, I feel.
We've got 2 hours to work on this, so if you could help us craft something like that, I'm sensing quite strong support for that. So if you could help us with it, that'd be great. I want to return to 18, and there's a suggestion that's come that we note that we know we need more, and we know we need a lot more, and we know it's got to be qualitative, and we know it's got to be connected. So what about if we put in that many delegates argued strongly for at least 50% of nature as an overall target based for conservation on land and sea? What about if we had that?
Yep, I support it.
Who would support that? Who would feel really uncomfortable with IUCN taking that position?
I think
One?
devalues.
Do you want to put your argument forward? It's a note of that.
Thanks. I'm Andrew McLean. I'm with the Wet Tropics Management Authority in Cairns. I just get uncomfortable about numerical targets in principle, really. It's the outcomes of it, it's a biodiversity outcome. So language about whatever sufficient to achieve the outcomes we seek, I think is appropriate, but we need to think about the way this sort of target is viewed in the wider community, and I suspect a 50% target might be a bit scary.
Well, we're not worried about being scary. At least, I hope we're not worried about being scary.
Well, I'm worried about maintaining wider community support for protected areas, so...
Right. Okay. Would anyone else... We've got 5 minutes left. That's it. So would anyone like to weigh in on this particular topic? Fiona, Levington behind you.
It's related to this topic, but
Also, Stephen, just given the backlash both in international NGOs and especially in this country against protected areas, I wonder if, as a group of scientists in the Congress, we need to start with a firm commitment to the idea that protected areas remain a central tenet to biodiversity conservation, because that has been very much lost since Durban. While I appreciate the role of wider landscape conservation, the central role of protected areas, and I believe in that we should be mentioning the importance of a reasonable coverage, and I don't know what percentage you'd want to say for categories 1 and 2 and 3.
Okay, just, you got somebody right there?
Very specifically, sorry to jump the queue, on the issue of saying that many delegates argued for at least 50%. I want to see 50% come up. It's been made very clear as an aspirational target that that is wise. However, I recommend against that wording in this resolution or the outcomes of this session, because either we are serious about what we are recommending or we are not. If we simply downgrade a statement by qualifying it to say that delegates or many delegates asked for it, we're saying that it wasn't strong enough to get up. And so we destroy our case for that point, which in this situation is 50%. Either we want it or we don't. Don't say, well, some of us sort of wanted it, because it marginalises it.
I'm trying to respect the fact that many people don't want it as well, and they're serious too. So it's not a matter of being serious or not. There's a genuine concern for numerical targets and a genuine concern that targets need to be built from the ground up based upon conserving biodiversity and adaptively understanding that till we get to a point where we don't. I get, and I think everybody gets, that that's not a campaignable target. You made that point, and others have made that point really well. So we're trying to find a reasonable solution through that activity. So that was the proposal on the table. We might find some other wording around that. Just right beside you.
Diane Mackey from Protected Area Workers Association, New South Wales. Just to inform the debate, just a procedural issue, we can't find the existing wording of recommendation 19 on your document in the document library, but could we perhaps just throw it up on the screen so people can see where we've got to so far with your recommendation?
Robert, could you flash back? Right. So we haven't modified it yet. Penny's been collecting suggestions for it, but just so everyone can see it, it's at the bottom there on 19, if that's helpful. And you may be right, because we wrote this just after the ACHI session, and it may not have got uploaded in the document that went onto the website. We, of course, will re-upload a new one. So, over there.
Rob Dick, recently formerly of the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. I'm uncomfortable about the 50% figure. It doesn't really enunciate within that 50% how much of that 50% will be allocated to strict IUCN category protected areas. If it is intended that it be strict IUCN protected areas, then I think it's completely unachievable, and I don't think very marketable as well. And I also think the counter to that is that it probably means that the development lobby are going to rub their hands with glee, thinking that they've got 50% of the rest of the landscape to do whatever they like. And I think we really need to recognise what the science is telling us, and that is that we really need around 70 or possibly more of the landscape to be retained in some form or other in its natural state. But within that 70%, you have a smaller figure which is protected at the more strict IUCN protected area levels.
Just you've already had a couple of shots, so I just want to make sure other people get a chance. Who else wants to weigh in on this issue?
Thank you. Kate Fitzherbert from Bush Heritage. Having been involved for quite a long time in trying to encourage the general community to support conservation, I think there is real value in thinking about how we are going to sell this to the community, because it will be this community that drives this, not our governments. If we can get community support for these goals, then we have a much better chance of getting our governments to follow. With that in mind, I'm really supportive of Hugh's comment that we need to go on and on until the conservation, or till the biodiversity of the world is recovering, basically. And I think for the community, that is such a simple, powerful message that we can use those really simple messages supported by these recommendations to sell our story to the community. And I think if we don't do that well, and if we isolate the community from these recommendations, we really have no way of implementing them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As Trevor said, these are recommendations for the community, not just to governments. I'm going to have to close it there. Out of respect for this room is going to be used for a side event, and I encourage you all to stay for the side event. It's called Voices from Africa. They have some food for those who stay, not for anyone else. And I think it's going to be a really interesting session. So I want to thank you all. This was a really was a terrific wind up to Stream 1. We didn't resolve everything. We will do the best we can to incorporate your comments. And I would ask you now to, for those who aren't staying, to clear the room. Thanks very much. We'll see you at 2 o'clock for the closing plenary of parks.